And welcome back. And we are starting our conversation on air now, that is, with representatives of the Belize Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We have with us on set Rufino, who is the ex officio member of the Executive Council and the former VP for Commerce for the BCCI. And we have President Nikita Usher. Good morning, and welcome.
Welcome. Thank you.
And before we move into our conversation, of course, Nikita, you have once again taken up the role as president recently for the chamber. Tell us about the latest elections.
The term of the chamber is a 2-year term. Normally it ends around the 30th of April, 2 years after. So my second term commenced on the 1st of May. So there's a new board at the chamber. Mr. Lin was my former vice president. He's now, for reasons not of his own, he's now migrated on from Belize, but he's still sitting as my ex officio. Ex officio in the chamber is really an advisor to your president. So I sit with 3 ex officio members who kind of guide the presidents on where they're happening. So there is new vice presidents in the house. We have Mr. Sanchez as the treasurer, Ashanti Arthur still serve as secretary, Marissa Langsworth serve as VP for services, Alan Reimer for industry, and Mr. Marcelo Blake for commerce. And then you have 5 new councillors, William Usher, Andre King, Catherine Main, who did I miss? 2 more. Don't remember the next 2. I have to try and remember the names.
You know
what I mean?
Gilly Canton. Gilly Canton. And,
big name, man.
Yes, can't forget them. They're the big boys. So that's where we are right now. And we have 3 ex officios, Ms. Kay Menzies, Emil Mena, and Mr. Rufino Lin.
Okay. So at the point of a new strategic direction for the chamber or continuation plan? Continuation.
The last board, actually one of the last mandate that I was given at the last board meeting of the last term was we must pursue the ICJ vigorously as a partner in trying to educate our Belizean citizenry. And so I think last month, 25th of June, 26th of June, thereabout, we had our first series with Dr. Assad Schumann, and he presented his version of the ICJ to the membership of the chamber. And there'll be a series of those coming up. So as we progress, that's going to be the hot topic for us. But of course, we have not given up on the topic.
Will the chamber have a position on how people should vote?
No. I don't know that the chamber I have not been given a mandate to say there's a position to do such, but we are trying to do as much as educate our citizens, and you decide your own. But of course, the continuation point must not stop on tax reform, and that has been the chamber's push for the last 10 years, and we have not given up on that topic at all.
Okay. So let's move into our topic for this morning, and this has been one, I think, that where the conversation sometimes is louder than other times. We have been trying to hear different opinions and different positions on this issue. I think Belizeans in general just have the same opinion. The gas prices are too high, it's very prohibitive, and the government position is we need the tax. The chamber has written to the Prime Minister to speak of your concerns before, and before you wrote the letter, you were speaking about it as well. I want to hear now what your current position, given the response from government, that it is very simple. The FinSec said every cent that is reduced from the tax, it will be $3 million that they won't be able to collect.
Well, I think let's start from the point of what the chamber has always been advocating for, and that is a comprehensive tax review. It can't be a piecemeal approach where each time there's a shortage in your coffers to cover your expenses, you find the easiest way at levying the tax. And fuel is the easiest way to do it because it's so clean. I mean, you add it and everything is paid in. That can never be, it can be if government wants to solve their problem, but it does not solve growth in a country. It does not solve the economic demands because at the end of the day, fuel drives everything. The productive sector, transport sector, you name it, that is what makes it. And fuel will make it very uncompetitive for any goods being produced in Belize. And so that is the driving force behind where we stand. Now, each time you increase your price on fuel, it eats into what the sector, the private sector, has to make adjustments for. Every time you add a cost, the private sector has to be adjusting. And so in that vein, then we say, why is it then that we have to be making the adjustments, but we don't see the same happening at government? Each time your revenue base shrinks, there is no shrinkage in your costs. And they seem not to be of any interest, as far as we are seeing, to look at that structure, which is what we have written about for several times. So the response that came back from the Prime Minister, and well, before I go there, basically the chamber was saying that you can adjust your prices on fuel without changing your tax. You're saying that there's been no tax change in the way you've done it. But we used examples for you to show you that back in 2014, the landed price of fuel was greater than what it is today, but yet the pump price was less. So what changed this time around? Obviously, you have changed your tax, and we showed where the difference was. It was about $1.50, if I remember right. So obviously, you have made a change in the way how you calculate your taxes. To your gain, yes, to the government's gain, and rightfully so. In his letter, his response was that he needs every tax, every dollar in tax. He actually alluded to, if you don't want me to do that, then I will increase GST, I will increase business taxes, and all the rest that goes. Us at the chamber, we are saying, you don't have to do that. There's other ways of addressing this issue. And that's what we've been cementing the point, that there is a solution, although in his letter he alluded to, you're asking me to solve something that is insolvable. So, but for us, that's not what we feel.
Yeah, and just to add to what the President has been saying, if we go back a little bit in history, and I can go back to 1998, when the business tax was introduced along with the corporate tax structure for companies. The cost of fuel was very, very low compared to what it is today. Taxation was different than what it was today. It was low. The RRD was a big component of the taxes that government took in 1998.
RRD, revenue replacement duties.
Yeah, and when you look over time, there's been some changes in terms of RRD was eliminated, but it was not sort of eliminated per se. It was simply added into the excise duty. That had an impact, a negative impact on the oil industry, on the players in the market. But apart from that, we have always, because of high prices, we've always had contraband in Belize, fuel contraband from Mexico. In 2014, when we saw the prices going down and the pump prices actually going down, we saw a spike in demand. Obviously, people locally will be buying more, but actually the demand for contraband fuel was drying up, and that meant more volume sold locally. As the prices began to go up again now, naturally there will be less consumption from the local market. We're also seeing a rise in contraband. So when you take up the prices above, say, around $10 at the pump, you begin to see a rise in contraband. For every gallon that comes across the border, the government loses that revenue. So while we agree that government must have some sort of revenues, there are some level of fundamental services that government needs to provide, need to finance through taxation. We believe that we need to look at taxation as a tool to encourage development rather than as a tool just to make money, to provide services that I am committed to, I'm not prepared to really look at, to optimize and rationalize.
So now, when the Prime Minister calls this issue insolvable, I think if we look at it at a very simple perspective, it makes sense. We need the tax revenue as a country. Not the Prime Minister, but we need it as a country. And in the budget presentation, obviously, I think one of the things that they herald is that, well, we're not implementing new taxes on the regular citizenry. It is essentially just a continuation of what was being done before. So the revenue is needed, and people need to use fuel. And so it seems as a no-brainer almost to be able to continue this process, as cost prohibitive as it is for your average citizen. So tell us why you feel that there are solutions that are not being looked at from the administration at this point.
Well, let's start with that, since we want to go that direction. And I opened up earlier in saying that sometimes you have to look, it takes somebody else from outside to really look at your operations, to really come in. That is why you have consultants, right? They come in and they look at your operations and they see, you might not be seeing it. Let's start from this standpoint. Why are we where we are now? If you look at where government expenditures have gone, tremendously higher, and if you use the years that we're looking at, tremendously higher than where they were before to provide the services. What has created that? If you look at the Auditor General's report, let's go there. Although they are years behind, when the law speaks to every department providing for you reports audited for the Auditor General, the last report that we've seen was only 2 departments out of 33 that has provided their financials. And that 2 departments alone could not account for almost $60 million. Imagine if you have then all the other departments doing the same. So we have not addressed the fundamental issue in-house. Why can't all departments provide what is required by the Auditor General? Account for what you have received. If you have overspent, you have to account for it. We have to do it in business. If you are overspending then, that means your expenditures are rising way above your revenue base. So to cover those expenditures that are keeping rising and rising and rising, you have to be taxing because you have to increase your revenue base. And the easiest way to do so is to then come to fuel tax. Why not reverse the trend then? Why not look in-house and see why do we have such expenditures that are exceedingly higher than what was originally budgeted for? When you look at the tax department, 2 tax departments that was listed, income tax and GST, there's arrears in excess of $90 million. Now, I can't tell you that all of that is collectible because we have statute bar. Lawyers would tell you. I don't know, we don't know how much of that is collectible. But there seem to be, just leave it along the wayside, it's reported every time, $90 million at the last report. What have we done to address that? If we don't collect it, then you're short of money, and so the easiest way to fix it again is to keep on padding that cost. Now, in the Prime Minister's response, he looked at us and said, well, I will have to fire 3,000 base workers. Well, the Chamber has not been one that has championed for that because the private sector, as weak as it is today, can't absorb 3,000 people coming on for unemployment. Where am I going to put them? However, it is time for us to address the issue of pension age. Why can't we adjust pension now? We're at 55 in government. The Army just moved from 45 now to, I don't know if they went to 50, but some change that they made. Most other countries are at 60. Why can't we adjust the issue of pension being contributory? Right now, a big chunk of government expenses is pension costs. But in the private sector, it's a contributory scheme. You contribute, I contribute. Because the pension is for you, so the cost is less on GOB. But these are decisions that we seem to be pushing it, kicking the bucket down the road. And these are part of the cost structure that I'm talking about that are keeping just... Why can't we have a freeze on employment? I don't even know if government knows what is their list of employees. Is it 5,000? Is it 15,000? Is it 20? We don't know. And then whenever you ask, you get numbers that are just floating numbers. Can they not be a decision that we freeze? These are some of the points that the Chamber is saying to you. If you can have in-house, now that is fixing the expenditure side. There's revenue side that we have to look at as well. If you can fix, first and foremost, your house, get your departments them to, as per the law, report what are the expenditures that they've done. Where they exceeded their budget, why?
No. I've heard this call to government before, coming from the teachers. It's just a different entry point. Mm-hmm. Their concern was, you know, we deserve, which I think they were, a raise in their salaries. Mm-hmm. Adjustment in their salaries. And so clean up your in-house, cut this, do that. They were sort of ignored.
They were ignored. They have, actually, the NTUCB has been called, the larger union body has been calling for the public sector.
Cost-cutting mechanism.
Yes.
There's a committee set up to do it. And we have been in contact with them. We've been in collaboration.
So we've heard this call before, and we've seen the response before. It seems the chamber has a little bit more peso, a little bit more weight, but the likelihood is that you're going to be ignored. What, in terms of looking at, because clearly, if you not do this, there's going to be an unpopular political consequence. Not hiring more people, changing the culture of politics. And I don't care if it's the current government or previous government, there's a culture of wastage, which is completely contrary to what business is.
Correct.
And I hear what you're proposing, but would you agree that there has to be something radical coming from government, and it's highly unlikely to do that?
Yeah. Well, it seems that, and if I could just add, because I've wanted to go that route too, it seems that the least effective way to make an impact is to tell the administration, cut down your cost in proposing solutions. Perhaps it seems like a personal attack, and I think one of the things that you've been saying very clearly is that we as the people deserve to know this information. The administration is legally bound to provide this information. The unions have been calling for the workers list for a long time to really be able to help their cost-saving measures, because if they know how many people are working, they can be able to make recommendations there as well. But I think, as Kevin is pointing out, the unions have failed. You have proposed this in the past before, whether there is a non-response or a response saying, well, I need to do this, or we need to do this as a country. It seems very ineffective. What makes you think now there will be a different look at it?
Well, I don't know that, I don't want to agree fully that the unions have failed. The union have gotten some of their requirements satisfied. I think we're though, and I think it all has to recognize that it can't just be a chamber cry. It can't be myself and Rufino sitting here every time singing the same song. At some point, we all have to join forces if we really want to make the change. The radical change that you are talking about requires a unification of all. All of us are affected. Fuel costs touch every one of our pockets. And therefore, if we don't see that as a reason for us to jump on the bandwagon and say, you know what, government, it's time. And I really and truly, I'm not really interested in the politics side of it. We're interested in the economic side of it. There has to be some hard decisions taken. And that has to be the only way that we address the issue. Similarly, we have gone the revenue side. Right? It's not just expenses that we're looking at. All right? We have looked at revenue side as well. And if you look at the last IDB trade and tax reform report that was done, which was recommended to government, which involved private sector, union, and government together. A beautiful piece of report. But are we willing to take that step? So it's been done by the IDB, financed by the IDB, to recommend to government some of the changes that has to be done. But yet, it doesn't move.
Yeah, and just to add to what the president is saying here, I mean, the short-term solution seems insoluble, right? Because you present to me, if I cut down my taxes on fuel, I fail to recover $52-something million.
Yeah.
And that's equivalent to funding XY ministry. And that's a space, to me,
short-term.
It's a simplistic short-term perspective of what we're proposing to do. We're actually looking at structural changes that will eventually lead to efficiency in the services that is provided by government, which will require less revenues. And also we're asking for that revenue base to be widened, because it's a smaller and smaller number of people who are being taxed more and more and more. And so we are telling government it goes against every strain of, to use the term, natural justice or fairness, that the diligent few are being asked to bear a burden that the delinquent are not willing to pay. And we are saying there's more delinquency when taxes are higher.
And when you say delinquent, you mean these persons who have led us to the $90 million or these businesses that have led us to the $90 million in arrears in GST?
We're talking about people who evade tax because the tax is too high, or naturally their business values push them to actually evade taxation, or but the point is that as we have higher taxation burden on this economy, more and more goes on
the informal market.
On the ground.
One of the issues, I think, after the budget presentation that we heard very often, and primarily from the opposition who speaks out against the budget, was the lacking innovation in looking at revenue collection in the country. And I always use the example to keep it as simple as possible for the viewers. If I can't afford my cost of living as an employee, I may look into moonlighting. In other words, instead of, I can cut down my cost, but if the kids have to go to school and eat, that's just essentials. So I need to make more money. What we've not been doing is looking at ways to make more money, our own version of moonlighting as a country, to be able to subsidize the cost of what it takes to run the country. What are your suggestions in looking, and you were getting at it, with looking at revenue collection, and what are your thoughts? Do you think that we are just simply lacking in innovation, political will, or perhaps we don't even have the technical expertise anymore to be able to identify solutions as to how we can increase the revenue for the country?
Well, we'll go there first, since that is where we want to go. You know, when Dr. Barnett became the new Minister of, or Sub-Minister of Finance, perhaps for the first time, and I will say perhaps for the first time because my 4 years at the Chamber were previous to my presidency, I've never heard of any consultation in preparation for budgets. Yeah. In my term as presidency, I kind of sensed that was going to be the new approach of government. And so the Chamber took on, I appointed a committee, subcommittee in my group to do what we call recommendations for government. The entire Christmas holiday, we were on the table, waiting for government to come to the table. We submitted a document to government with about 13 revenue streams that could easily be implemented. I'll give you a flavor of one that we felt, but I'll deal with administration separately. And we looked at the borderline, the amount, and it goes back to the informal market. And there's about 1.2 million people that go over the border every year, whether it be Guatemala side or the Mexican side. And I will leave you to do the math. But if you take 1.2 million people and they buy on average $50, that's $50 times 12.5% that did not come to government in Belize. Do the math. Our suggestion then was to, if you want to stimulate, now how does that affect? It affects government here on taxes, it affects the business locally because they have done investment here and they're putting goods on the table that you're not buying because you're going over the border to purchase. If you introduce a fee for the border, say $10, what will that do?
Departure tax.
Entry tax, departure tax, whatever you want to call it. With it, 1.2 million times 10, and you could use whatever number you want. What will it do? Two things it will do. One, it will generate revenue for you, because two, it will also take those who will not see it as affordable to go over there to spend the money home, so the taxes will come. If we don't have the evasion, okay, or avoidance, whatever one you want to call it. That's one way. Do the math and see how much money you're talking about. We looked at the administration side. We're using a tax system to also solve or to accommodate a pro-poor program. We have to divorce the two. A tax system is to tax, and if you want to run a pro program, and we're not against a pro-poor program, but we're also saying to government, we must also have pro-growth too. You can't just have pro-poor. We also have to have pro-growth and pro-development. You can run your pro-poor program separately, but you must be able to tax. So what the tax system has been doing now, which creates a bottleneck inside your whole administration, government after government has increased the amount of zero-rated goods on that list. If you ever look at that list, take a chance and look at it. It's pages of pages of pages of goods that are listed in there as zero-rated. Means it was designed then for the, I don't want to use the poorer class of people as what they could refer to it, but those who are less in the means of trying to buy it, that you don't have a tax on it, and it goes for them tax-free. If that is what you want to do, what does that do then? When a business have to sell that zero-rated item, you should see the nightmare of administrating that inside the tax office. One suggestion then, if you want to run a pro program, take that separately, collect tax on everything that you want, but lower the tax. Let's tax whatever you want to tax, but not at 12.5%. Let's go down, and then the revenues that you collect.
So changing the structure, having a lesser tax for
far
what is
simpler system.
But then isn't that
administratively,
Sure.
your staff is going to have the time to go and do the audits that needs to be done.
But isn't that then increasing the burden on people who are already struggling in the country?
That's why you go pro. So you take a percentage of that, then and then how you want to distribute that in your baskets, in your school fees, in your all the rest of it, you go that direction. But you can't use the tax structure to solve both. Because the administration, what has happened now is that your total GST office has now become caught up in trying to reconcile all the different zero-rated. So there's no check and balance at the stores. There's no audits being done, or hardly ever. The audits are way behind schedule. Hence you're running up into these receivables that are coming behind because you can't collect it because you don't have the staff, the resources to get in there.
I'm listening though, and if I am a member of cabinet, a politician out there sitting, listening, I am saying to myself that, one, you've been using a lot of profane language because you've been using the word tax, and it's probably the most unpopular. If I do what you're suggesting that I do as a politician, I won't win. I'm going to lose. That rhetoric will kill me. It probably make me very popular. It probably will make me solve some of the deficit that we have in the budget. But I'm not going to win again. And the entire purpose of a politician is to be successful. That's one. Two, it's kind of like you're saying you want to have your cake and eat it too. Because the focus really is on taxation, rather than I thought the focus could be, and I'm trying to look at it from the bottleneck. It's not more about revenue collection, but about revenue generation. So let's not worry about, I'm going to eat less, I'm going to bring in more groceries. And that is near impossible to do. That's why it's an almost unsolvable problem.
I mean,
how do I win and win?
The question, I think, was focusing on how do we bring a structural solution to this. And we're saying that when we focus only on tax collection and compare it against what a particular ministry is spending, I think that's a very superficial approach to the issue. And I think that's where your question is going at. Structurally, we need to do different things. Tax reform is a structural change that will then seek not only to focus on how much am I doing now, but how do I use tax as a tool to promote growth? How do I make my people or the worker in Belize or the businesses more productive? And once we make Belizeans and Belize companies more productive, more competitive, then we are enabling them to be doing more and more. And by doing more and contributing more, the revenue will take care of itself. But when, because of my, I won't say, I'm scared or the politics of it allows or prohibits me from making the right economic decisions, then eventually I will also fail. Because if the politician's role is to succeed, if you do good economics and you promote growth and you ensure that there is development, you will win too. But we have to trust the system. We have to trust that the decisions we make today in making structural change to the economy will actually yield the results. And we have examples in the world where decisions were, Singapore, Taiwan, even China today, even as a communist country, they have made changes and made decisions that have promoted growth. I mean, it's there for us to learn from and be able to take some decisions to basically do these structural changes to grow this economy.
So what you're saying is, despite the political popularity of a structural tax change, it's more of a long-term vision looking at economic development. Now I have to bring it back to the fuel tax for a second, because I know one of the things we've not been able to talk about in the conversation so far is how the current fuel tax still causes high costs for your average Belizean, whether or not they're buying fuel, because of the transportation cost that is included in moving everything in the country. And so, of course, that then leads the critics to say, well, the private sector really isn't feeling the pinch because they're simply passing it on to the consumers anyway. So why are you speaking out when you're still not the one who is taking on this additional burden?
I think the President made reference to that recently.
Competitiveness?
If I have $1 to spend, and suddenly, and I used to spend buying 10 items, because that's what it allowed me to buy. But now, because the cost of these things have increased, I cannot buy 10. I can only buy 9. But I need the 10 to survive. What would I do? I would maybe try to go across the border, and rather than spend that $1 here, I'm going to spend it over there. This economy suddenly lost $1 spent. And $1 spent multiplied by the 1.2 million people that go across the border, that's what we're losing. So yes, as we tighten taxation on the few, we squeeze out revenue from the few, because those more and more people are encouraged to go underground, to not report, to evade, or to spend their money somewhere else. And then what you actually set out to achieve,
just lost.
Just lost it.
So you're making the same money from less people. That's what you're saying.
But let me just add one more to that, and that is called competitiveness. And in business today, you and I know that if you're not competitive, you will not be successful. So despite the fact that the fuel price, and while it may be the critics saying that we would have passed on, truthfully, we can't pass that entire cost across. The buying public will not be able to absorb that full layer of tax to be passed on to the goods. Otherwise, your goods become uncompetitive. So there is a portion of it that has to be borne by the business. And for those of us who are exporting outside of Belize, that is where it is even more critical, because we don't control the external marketplace. If we don't produce a good here in Belize that is competitive, you could keep your good in Belize.
And not be able to sell it.
And not be able to sell it. And Belize cannot absorb, in many instances, 350,000 people. And if I use the industry that I work in, it represents 2% of the purchases of citrus juices here in Belize. It means that 98% of that juice has to get out of this country.
Nikita, the average Belizean out there just wants the price of fuel to go down.
Right.
They don't care if it's government spending less. They don't care if the business people making less. When we look at taxes, taxes are really, it's not cabinet that gets it. It's not government. They're supposed to take that same money and
pass it on to services.
Streets, services, as one minister likes to say. That's the taxes should not be stolen by politicians. So, and the average businessman makes about 15%. That's about a reasonable profit.
That's fair.
Why can't the business community take a haircut on what they're collecting and give the general public some ease?
But go ahead.
Let's take that.
I'm looking at it from all angles, no?
Yeah. No.
But
It's a good discussion.
15%, and let's just stick to the fuel. 15%. If the price of fuel is $10, right, and we take 15% as taxation, that means tax should be $150. If we apply the same principle, the same rule. But today, for the price of fuel, almost 45% tax.
But the difference is that one business would get 15%. Whatever taxes government is collecting is for 385,000 people. So that's the reason for the disproportion between what government would be collecting, which is significantly more.
Okay.
For entire
let me go at your discussion.
Or Texaco or whichever company there is.
The point we're trying to make here is that,
no,
I think your return ought to be based on, well, from a business perspective, on the investments you have, right, in a certain economic activity. Government's investment in the fuel industry, for example, I would say is zero. And yet collects the biggest share
45%
of it. You understand me? And I've been in the industry for some time. I mean, we are efficient collectors for government taxation. 3 companies. Today, Sol, Uno, and Puma. Every month we have to declare, we have to make customs declarations and pay our duties. That's how government gets its fuel taxation, through 3 companies. Government has...
Can I say it's unfair to say government is 0% in? Because the streets that the trucks come to bring in the fuel are government streets, they're people's streets. The Bureau of Standards comes in to check the machines and make sure everything is okay. Those are government. All the other services, so it can't be 0. It might not be proportionately, but 0 is a bit of an understatement as to what government contributes. Agree?
I'll accept that.
But I want to add one to yours, Kevin, and I want to say that you're saying you're asking private sector to take a haircut.
I'm asking the possibility. I know
okay, but I want to go there because you're looking at it from just a fuel tax perspective. But let's look at it from this standpoint. Remember, the business community is facing increased costs in all angles, and I'll give you one example. 5 years ago, I didn't have to have a camera inside my business. Today, that's a must. Security guards have now become one of the most popular businesses to have. That's an increase in cost of business. When you have to go and apply for certain certificates, the fee structure has gone up. Look at the recent gun license, gone from 75 to where? You could tell me, almost $200. These are costs that are increasing on business houses on a daily basis, which we have absolutely no control over. So asking us to take a haircut, actually, it has actually eroded the 15% that you're talking as a fair return on your investment. So there is a haircut being taken unannounced.
So let's, in the interest of time, move forward in what your current recommendations are. You have responded to the Prime Minister following his last response with new recommendations specifically about the fuel tax. And I think one of the things that Kevin is speaking of is really just what the layman sees as this issue. You know, we want to pay less. We feel that there is some entity out there who perhaps is laughing all the way to the bank, and it certainly is not when we go to the gas pump. And it is, I mean, at this point in time, when you think of all the expenses that your average Belizean has and the amount of money they're making, they're not thinking about their employer's profit. They're perhaps not even looking at where there may be wastage in government. They just want to pay less. So what are your recommendations that you would really want this administration to consider when it comes to fuel tax that will not cut into the revenue, but also allow for some kind of alleviation at the gas pump?
We're saying to government that we're not going to fight, but we have the strongest opinion, and the strongest one that is, that we can cut fuel down. The Belizean public ought to have a lesser price on fuel. And we appreciate that you need that whatever you cut by, you have to find areas somewhere else. We're not running away from that because we're not telling you to close down no service section. But we are saying to you that 2 years ago, we also presented you options for revenue enhancements that we now need to sit around the table and consider short-term ones, medium-term, and long-term. We're also saying that that alone will not solve the issue, but you must also come to the table willing to discuss the structural changes that must accompany those issues. And those structural changes will adjust or will address the wastages that we speak about, the conformity to what the law provides for in the sense of the AG's ministry, and these are some of the things that we feel ought to be done. Trade and tax reform document that was done by the IDB has to be looked at. All of this is on the table, and so from where we sit, we feel that there is room for reduction and there is solvable ways to get your bridge finance that you need.
One more point I wanted to clarify further. What I've heard from you several times, and I just want to make it very clear in the end, is that you feel if there's a reduction in the cost of fuel, there's an increase in consumption.
Definitely.
Either way.
Definitely.
You feel that you have the research to show that?
Well, we have the experience.
You have the prior years, I would say.
It's a principle of economics.
I mean, we saw this happening in 2014 when the prices began to go down, and the pump prices also began to go down. We saw the spike in local demand for fuel.
The principle economics, as Kevin mentioned, if your price of fuel is lower here than what it is over the border, will I drive across the border to buy fuel over there?
But I can also see I mean, when you look at the balance of payment situation for Belize, in the sense that the more fuel you buy as well, is the more U.S. currency you have to buy, you have to find to pay for the imports. And that also is a challenge for our economy, because if we're not exporting as more than we are importing, then we're not generating the U.S. currency to pay for the imports.
Rufino, my final question in terms of, and I'm happy that the Chamber is taking this on, because it amplifies what other people are saying, not only the people who are cannot heard, but also the unions. And when you see that sort of coordination, it means that somebody's saying the right thing. And I think eventually government has to listen and will listen. But we're talking about fuel tax and we're focused in on fuel tax, but there's a wider question, which is energy. I don't know if this was one of the points that was in the, and I'm glad if it is.
Yes, it is.
But we're so focused on petrol fuel that we have not really taken the opportunity to look at diversifying. How much is that being pushed to me, which in terms of the long-term picture is far more valuable?
That's a discussion by itself. But that is in there, yes. That is in there.
And what is on the horizon within the private sector? Do you know if anything coming on the horizon to say to make we have another pony in this race?
I really don't know off the top, but I know that in our discussions, we've had that type of discussion, but I'll tell you the truth, Kevin, that's going to be a whole new discussion, but truthfully, it is one that is worth having.
Yeah.
It is worth discussing now on the table. And I think if I am to end with my last one, as I'm seeing Elena telling me that indirectly, we have taken on a task this size, and I like the word that you use, amplified, but it can't be the Chamber alone. It has to be a unified team that approaches this issue. All of us who are feeling the pinch must join the bandwagon to say to government, I like what I've seen. I do think that it's doable, that it's solvable, including the unions. And I know they have, because a lot of our discussions have been with them, especially on the cost side. So I think all of us putting together can have some changes. That's what I mean.
Yeah, also just to add, I think if you have the right incentives, then you have the right, or you have interest from the entrepreneurs to go in that direction. Taxation should be not only a revenue collection tool, but a way to incentivize people and businesses and entrepreneurs into the direction you want to go as a country. So we look to our leaders to really be able to define, where will Belize be 10, 15, 20 years from today? And what do I need to do today structurally
so that
to be able to get there in 10, 20 years? And once we have defined that, I think we have to be firm, strong, and visionary, and motivate our people across Belize, not only the consumer or the businesses, but my people in government. I don't think we have found as a country something to rally around to be in 10, 20 years from today. And for that, I think we are paying a very high price, because we look at taxation for fuel, but that's not the real issue. The real issue is, how do I bring incentives to people? How do I increase my human capital? How do I have a better legal system? How do I make everything commercially or contractually predictable in Belize? How do I have better government, honest government? How do I have less corruption in this country? Those are the seeds that I need to look at in terms of addressing what I want to be.
They have to be planted at some point in time.
Marlene,
So we're out of time.
I should say before, if the Chamber were government for 1 year, maybe we'd have some change.
Well, that's a whole other conversation, but we are out of time, and we got to move on into our next segment. We're actually going to be joined by a keynote speaker that will be doing a presentation on strategic entrepreneurship for millennials. That's going to be an interesting workshop that you guys have, but we're going to get a bit of a preview after the break, so stay tuned.